From the heart of Dubai, where tomorrow is being built today, to the world. Welcome to the CTO Show with Mehmet. Here, we redefine technology and reimagine possibilities. With Mehmet, delve into the riveting realms of AI, cybersecurity, and digital technology. Experience the thrilling highs and lows of startups. Immerse yourself in the spirit of entrepreneurship and witness the future of business innovation being written in real time. Now, without further ado, let's tune in and explore the future.
Hello and welcome back to a new episode of the CTO Show with Mehmet. Today I'm very pleased joining me, Edward Brawer from Canada. Edward, the way I love to do it is I keep it to my guests to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit more about you, your journey, and what you are up to currently. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Matt. Pleasure being on. So I'm Edward Brawer, co-founder, CEO of PodcastAI. So we're a podcast automation platform. And just to tell you about myself, I've been building websites, apps, software for the past, I'd say 25 years. And this is my second startup, but my first venture funded startup. And that's basically my background. And to make it more political, I'm a Mac user.
I'm a Mac user too. Once you flip, you can't go back. So my own opinion, of course, all respect to the other folks out there. So, Edward, when I was preparing for this episode, and I see you've done, in your early in your career, some transition from having a, completing an undergraduate degree in biology and then shifting and pivoting to technology. So what was the main thing that attracted you to do this major change?
Yeah. So I was, from the start, just working on computers since I was 5, using my dad's Mac SE. And then from there, just making websites. I think I did my first website in 97. And then from there, I learned how to do PHP to have more interesting websites, of course. And that was about the time I was going to enter university. For those that know, Waterloo is the best university in Canada for computer science. But I went into biology because I thought I wanted to be a doctor. Turns out I didn't. And I already, knew how to program. I didn't figure I needed to take a CS degree. But one funny story is, in my dorm, there were all the engineering and computer science students, and typically they would start coming to me once they knew I knew how to program. They would ask me for help with their work that they had to do in first year. And, I'd ask them, I don't understand, you're in computer science. Why are you coming to me to help you, do software? And, what they would say is, oh, I thought they would teach us how to program. And I had to tell them hey guys, you're in the faculty of math. You're going to learn algorithms. You're going to learn some really conceptual stuff. You're not going to, they expect you to learn this stuff on your own. So anyways, by second year, they figured it out. But I ended up working actually with my grandfather's cardiologist, and just doing medical apps with him. And through that, I realized I actually did want to stay in doing software and not actually go into medicine.
That's for me, it was not that big shift. So I shifted from electrical engineering to computer engineering. And, I had the same thing. I thought, okay, from day one, we're going to be in front of these screens and we're going to start to write code, which is not the case, of course. So, the biggest surprise for me, I thought after finishing high school, I get rid of math and, the topics that I didn't like in science forever. But the surprise was no, you still have to do. Now, fast forward to your latest startup, right? So which is PodcastAI. Now, it's a common question that I ask every time I have a founder with me like you, Edward. I'm sure there was some moment or maybe series of events that led you to see that there is a need for what you have built. So um, I love to hear these stories because, when we talk to any founder, we say, okay, what problem are you solving? And why specifically this problem? So I would love to hear these, stories from you, Edward, and tell me more why you started Podcast AI.
Yeah, so the story it's interesting. It goes a little bit farther back than just realizing what product was needed. Um, so so me and my co-founder, we were working on our previous startup, which was doing okay, but it wasn't doing like venture type numbers or growth. And uh, I'm a fan of the All In podcast. A friend of mine introduced me to it. So the All In podcast, for those of you that don't know, it's the number one tech podcast. And it's Jason Calacanis, David Sachs, Chamath Palihapitiya, and David Friedberg. And about a year ago, this is after ChatGPT came out, I started playing around with the text to speech models, and I realized I could actually do their voices. And what I actually ended up doing is creating a parody episode of the All In podcast. So I called it the AI podcast, and I posted on Twitter. And the premise was the four of them were reborn as AIs, and it was pretty good because it was like their usual dynamic, but a parody. And it was pretty successful. It got retweeted by them, so it went really viral. I think the first episode alone had 600K views. And I ended up doing 6 of those podcast episodes, those AI based episodes. And the third of them was even a visually animated Elon Musk in there. So he became one of the characters in it. But, people were asking me, hey, is this real? Is there a GitHub repo? Can you publish it? How are you doing this? And at about the same time, Jason Calacanis, so for those of you that don't know, he's the fourth investor in Uber, Calm, and a few other companies that are really big. And he has an accelerator, sort of like Y Combinator, but it's called Launch. But he has an on-ramp to that accelerator called Founder University. And so somebody who on his team, Presh, had been asking for applications to Founder University. And, Sean and I, we found the domain name podcastai.com. We bought it immediately. It was $10,000, and if you had told me 10 years ago, I'd buy a domain name for 10,000, I'd tell you you're crazy. But we just looked at each other. We're like, yeah, this is the perfect domain name. And we incorporated. So this is about a year ago. And we got into Founder University. And that's when we were sort of working through, the goal or objective of the company is to be able to create entire episodes synthetically. But then we started working through the problem of, okay, to get to that goal, what do you have to do? Well, it turns out a big thing is transcripts. So we can get a sample of a person's voice and we can create content in their voice. But also we could get the transcripts of all their past podcasts and we could fine tune an LLM on that. And that way we could actually get an LLM sort of speaking, quote unquote, in the voice, as in the text, the way the person would speak. And so that when we realized that was the premise, then we said, okay, what can we do that's interesting here? And so Jason Calacanis has another podcast called This Week in Startups that's been running for well over a decade. I'd say probably, close over 15 years even at this point. And it's one of those OG podcasts that covers startups. So it's very interesting, like people from, you see all the huge companies today, like those founders were on This Week in Startups. So kind of like this show, but earlier. And, there's 1900 plus episodes, and his problem was maintaining a website for that was nearly impossible. So what we did was we made it so that Podcast AI would have a backend where you could upload all those episodes, transcribe all of them, and automatically create a website for the show. So thisweekinstartups.com is powered by us. And it gives you a vector search into all the past episodes. And then that's when we started talking um, to their team and their podcast producer, and some background on myself and our CTO. We're also podcasters. We've produced podcasts, been co-hosts on them, so a lot of experience in that domain. But also talking to them, we started realizing, okay, so we have all your episodes in our system. We're generating that website for you. We started like narrowing down what we could do for those websites. But then we realized, okay, they're spending 30 minutes doing chapters for their episodes. We can make it so you just press a button, and with an LLM, we can create all those chapters. And so we implemented that as a feature. We got some YouTubers that I know using it for chapters, and then they were saying, "Oh man, I wish I could be on Apple and Spotify. I just don't have time for that." And we realized, oh, we have all your episodes in our system. We could just generate a feed. So we added feed hosting. And so as we went on, we started adding more and more features that people were asking for, and what it turned into was really end to end automation of podcasts and podcasting. So automating all of those things that take so much time, generating social media clips. We're adding push to YouTube. We'll have that in 2 weeks. So really doing all that stuff. And then we started working back on, okay, here's a few people that have a blog and that blog actively. Let's turn their blog into a synthetic podcast using their voice. So we're merging back into that, but with the back end of an entire podcasting SaaS platform.
That's very interesting, because I was expecting something like this to happen. Even myself, last year, of course, ChatGPT was still new. I experimented. I know it didn't get any track because I just posted on the podcast platform itself. I didn't promote this. So I prepared set of questions to ChatGPT, and I used, what was that? TTS, that was very famous last year, and still it's famous. 11 Labs, yeah. So I took the answers from ChatGPT. Of course, I did it manually, and then I recorded an episode with ChatGPT. And I just wanted to explore, but then I found the idea a little bit silly. I didn't want to take more. When Gemini, which was called Bard, I had this idea of having these two, ChatGPT and Gemini, talk to each other. And then I found out that actually someone did that, but not as a podcast, just they recorded this freaking video. Maybe you have seen it, Edward, where, they were like putting a conspiracy theory that AI gonna go and take over the world. Nevertheless, so for me as a podcaster today, Edward, like, what would be, like you mentioned automation, and I'm a fan of automation. So apart from doing many things in less time, how does it help from, also, because when I'm asking this question, because people, like, whenever now we are using AI, they said, okay, where is the authenticity here? How I can leverage your platform while keeping also authenticity, and, without like letting people feel that, okay, everything is generated by AI.
Yeah. So this is a very common, topic and question, obviously. And, the answer is that what's going to become important in the age of deepfakes is provenance, because that's really the only marker that you have, to really, discern from what's canon and what's, fan fiction. So an example, so this is the CTO show. I assume there's a fair number of Trekkies out there in the audience. There's tons of Star Trek content that is fan fiction, right? So, and a lot of it, but because it's not canon, it doesn't have the distribution through official channels. And people that are looking for it, sure, they can consume it, but most people won't, simply because it's not the official content. And so, in the age of deepfakes and synthetic content, that really becomes important. So, for example, a celebrity, if they put out a statement, that statement is very unlikely to be written by that celebrity. It's probably written by their press person. So But what's important is that it came out through the official channels. And then if we look at it through, in different ways, movies, right? Yeah. Saturated with special effects, entire movies made entirely in CG. Now, nobody really cares whether they're made synthetically or whether it's really filmed on a film. And so that's really going to become the mindset, right? It's going to become, is this official content? Does it have the provenance? Because anybody's going to be able to create an episode of Joe Rogan, but it's only the Joe Rogan experience if it's Joe Rogan in there and not, something that was put out through another channel, or rather, sorry, it's only Joe Rogan if it came through Joe Rogan's actual podcast. And actually, it might even be synthetic, but so long as it has that seal of approval, it's just as good.
So what I understood from you, Edward, and maybe this is kind of not a technical question because you mentioned a couple of times, the LLMs. So is that, for example, and I'm thinking myself, I'm not yet there. Hopefully one day I'll be, but let's say I would put all the episodes of the CTO show over there, and then I can kind of have an avatar that can act exactly the same way as me and ask my guests, and also doing the comments same as I'm doing sometimes now with you, the same way. Is this like what it can be done with the podcast AI?
Yeah. So what we have right now is, for example, we would generate an entire website based on the show. It would have all the episodes. And then there's an AI chat button that you can press, and you have access to the Slack-like interface where you're talking with, the AIU. And you can ask any question about the current episode, and it'll respond as you. You could even turn on voice, and it'll respond in voice. And that's just our V1. And what we're working on is actually making it so that you can have. So, for example, we just hired a top level iOS engineer, Sean Allen. He regularly does actually tutorial content, and everybody consumes it to learn how to use the latest Apple technologies and APIs. And his task number one is going to be creating the world's greatest podcast app. And we're going to be able to have a Siri-like experience in terms of, I want to listen to more episodes like this. I want another show with this guest on. Can you summarize this episode for me? And if those shows are PodcastAI customers, then that summary is in first-person perspective in the voice of the host. So really authentic. But then the other thing he's going to be working on is you put on your Vision Pro or some other, VR headset, and you can have, using Gaussian splatter, we can do 3D models of the hosts. And you can actually, let's say you're listening to All In, you could be at the poker table with the four of them. And you could even ask questions back and forth on top of them replaying the episode. So essentially the holodeck. So the tech that's coming with this is going to be pretty insane. But V1 right now that we have, you can go back and forth with yourself as a host.
So you mentioned also, Edward, like the use cases are not just sometimes for podcasters. It can go even for the YouTubers as well. But let's keep the focus on the podcast. So from your perspective and from all the things that you have built and maybe the feedback you received, because you mentioned like you received feedbacks a lot from some of the users. How do you see the future of podcasts? And funny enough, I know that in the US, in Canada, and some other parts of the world, podcasting has been there for a long time. In my area here in the Middle East, so podcasts just started to pick up, especially in the past 2 or 3 years. So I'm starting to see like more podcasts. On the global level, we started to see also like more corporates doing their own podcasts. So how do you envision, your technology would affect podcast production? So is it gonna, I would not say eliminate, but maybe reduce the reliance on some full house podcast production company to do it? Or is it going to still require some production house to be involved? how do you imagine, the world in the future when it comes to podcasting?
Yeah, so podcasting, you really have all levels of production quality. You have people that are just doing a raw recording, they don't do any editing, and they just upload that to a platform, and that's it. That's their episode, and they don't bother with any metadata like show description, show notes, and stuff like that. So that's your most basic level. And for that, uh, the difficulty to start doing it very low, obviously, because it's overall low effort. And then at the very high end, you have podcasts like The Pitch or Crucible Moments. For example, these are all Vox Media produced. Those are the podcasts we would call like the highest end. They're almost like a TV show in terms of the production quality that goes in. And so podcast AI is going to make it so that the people that were really putting in the lowest level of effort are going to be able to have a lot of the aspects of having a professional production team, because they'll have automatic descriptions, automatic chapters, automatic viral moments going out to their social media accounts, automatically having a website. So automating a lot of that stuff. So it's going to raise the overall level of every podcast up. And then for podcasts that are very high level production, it's not going to take that over, right? You're still going to have, someone heading production and orchestrating everything at the very highest level. But what it's going to do is just kind of up the level for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Just I can give example from myself because, when I started the podcast, I was just experimenting. And, I can tell you my first maybe 10 episodes were horrible because I was doing solo, by the way, that time. Horrible in a sense, of course, like I'm not saying I was bad, but I mean, I didn't put the effort as you were mentioning, and then I started to discover these things. And yeah, like today I use some AI tools that makes the job much easier. But from what you are describing to me, Edward, today, it's like it's gonna be like a one-stop shop for doing everything for you, like from you know preparing maybe the questions for the guests, and then uh, if you want to use also like kind of an avatar to ask the questions, and then the post-production as well. So that's fantastic. Now, I want to shift a little bit gears, and like you mentioned in your introduction that this is the startup actually that is funded. I mean, VC funded. And while I was preparing, I saw that you mentioned in your profile that when you pitched to Sequoia, you had deleted third of the pitch deck. Funny enough that the topic of pitch deck, I discussed it a lot on the CTO show for a reason, because I know like first time founders, tech founders, maybe they are not experienced in this, and I like to hear the stories from successful founders who were who nailed it, as we say. So what happened there, and why you felt like you need to do something like this during and Sequoia, for people who doesn't know, like it's one of the biggest VCs in the world. So why you did this?
Yes. So the background is Podcast AI. So as I was saying, we got into the Founder University, which is the on-ramp to the Launch Accelerator, which is competitive with Y Combinator, and it's run by Jason Calacanis and his staff. And so we were in that program. And what happened in December is the whole cohort, so 7 companies, went to Sequoia to actually do a pitch to Roloff Botha, who is one, the head of Sequoia, and 2, is the person that brought in YouTube to Sequoia. So arguably the greatest VC of all time, in a sense. And so, Sequoia invests in companies a bit later on, not at that early a level typically. But it was sort of like a pilgrimage. And 6 of the companies were able to make it to that. One of them was in Macedonia, couldn't make it. And so we were in that room, and it was 10 minutes from Roloff coming in. And during the launch accelerator, what they do is every week they'll have a panel of investors and they'll have you do your 3-minute pitch. And so we would get really, really good at doing this 3-minute pitch, like almost like robots. Not in terms of delivery, but in terms of how good we are at just reproducing that pitch. And I sort of realized that it was kind of like the one chance to stand out. And so I did something pretty radical. 10 minutes from him coming in, I deleted the last third of my deck, and then we have a feature called an ad read generator. So if you've seen ad reads on podcasts, that is the host doing a sponsorship, basically saying, this is sponsored by so and so, and giving a call to action. Uh, I had loaded Crucible Moments, which is Roloff's podcast, into our system, in case maybe there'd be an opportunity to demo. And I was realizing that was my opportunity to demo, basically. And so I used our ad read generator. I searched Google for, what is Roloff Botha's favorite drink. I found a Quora article from or question from 13 years ago, asking, what's a good South African wine? And Roloff himself answered 13 years ago, go to africanhunt.com to find a good South African wine. So I went there. I found, random wine, Konota Pinotage, and I put it in our system. I said Roloff was the reader. I, just wrote, investing is hard. Relax with a good South African wine. Use code BOTHA for 10% off at checkout. And then I set, generate 60 seconds. And so I hit generate. And so it ad libs in Roloff's voice, meaning it knows what the show is, and it has his bio, so it knows who he is. And it generates the ad read text and the audio that goes with it. And so I didn't have time to, preview it to myself or anything. I just kept it there. And, it came time to pitch. And so I was first up. And I like being first up. You kind of want to be first or last if there's a few pitches. So you just don't get lost in between. So lucky enough, I was first. And so I got to that 2-minute point, and what I deleted was our go-to-market and roadmap. And so I said, at the 2-minute mark, I said, okay, and let's just listen to this. This is our ad read generator. So I hit play, and everybody was kind of floored. It was Roloff listening to himself pitch South African wine for his show as an ad read. I don't think Jason Calacanis knew that we had that. In fact, nobody in our cohort did. It ended that ad read. We hit the 3-minute mark, and so Roloff goes very good, but it's pronounced Pinotage, and so that's pretty funny. And then Jason, what he does is whenever we have these sessions, with a round table of investors, he'll ask them to rate the companies, 3, 2, 1, meaning the best. And so he asked them to rate the companies, and we got number 1 from Roloff. So that was pretty cool. He put us in touch with this content team. We just seized the opportunity, basically.
You know what you did something I keep repeating to people, and I tell even myself. So you do this whenever you're gonna pitch to an investor or to a customer. So what you did, Edward, is a masterclass. I wasn't with you, of course, but I was imagining the face, because this is something they teach to all salespeople, like know your customer. And when they say know your customer, it's not like just, okay, what's his name? How long has he been or she been in the job? No, but you went the extra mile to do all this research. And I think the reason that whatever you've done resonated with him is because he felt special. Of course, he doesn't want, someone to make him special. He's special already. But, these small touches makes a lot of difference. And this is proves, I see pitch decks right, left, and center, as they say. And they say, if you can tell it in a story way or relate it to the investor in somehow, you can have the best graphics, you can have the best, number statistic that you have collected from here and there. But what you have done is a masterclass, Edward. Really, I'm trying just to visualize how was his reaction when he saw or he heard like his own voice there. So absolutely fantastic. Now, you mentioned a couple of times about Jason Calacanis and the founder university, and you mentioned like he was like he's known as an angel investor. You mentioned like he put He was the first in Uber. Uh, so what is, the main, in addition, of course, to being introduced to investors and so on. Um, so I'm interested to know, like, how did you get to him in the first place? And like, other than being in that cohort, which for people maybe they would know about Y Combinator more, and of course the Founders University. But I mean, what did you learn from someone who's veteran, I would say, in the startup world?
Yeah. So it's interesting. The way we got on his radar, and it wasn't necessarily intentional or anything. It's just I was a fan of the All In podcast. Those AI tools came out, and I did that parody of the AI of the All In podcast. And he's the one who actually retweeted it. So I did 6 episodes, and then his team was asking for companies to apply to Founder University, and then that's how I got in and got on the radar. Now, Founder University is especially interesting because um, the number of applications to Y Combinator, there's 40,000 per cohort applications. And very few companies can get in. There's not that many slots, right? There's maybe 100, 200, something like that. And so it's very hard to get in. Founder University has a wider aperture, and that gives you an opportunity to stand out. So what's the common denominator here? With that podcast parody that I did last year, I was able to stand out to Jason Calacanis and get myself into Founder University. In Founder University, we stood out as having the fastest shipping velocity in the cohort. And so we got a 25K investment in Founder U, which is just a bookmark for them. And then by September, we got invited into their accelerator. That was a 100K investment. And now Launch is actually leading a round, and that's $1 million investment. And so, the way Jason Calacanis, so I did a podcast with him on This Week in Startups very recently, last week. And the way he put it was, what did it take me? Maybe 10 hours, let's say, to do that first parody episode. And he's invested over $1 million in the company. So in terms of effort, that's maybe $100,000 an hour. So, it obviously you have to build the company. So there's a lot more work than that. But the point is, you actually have to get, what's the common denominator? Again, getting noticed, right? So getting noticed by Jason at Sequoia, what did we do? We got ourselves noticed. By doing that thing where we actually deleted the last third of the deck and actually did a live demo using Roloff's actual voice. And so getting noticed is the common denominator, because what is there, like 7 or 8 billion people on the planet? How are you going to get noticed? Like, there's so many people pitching companies to actual venture capitalists that there's too much noise and they need filters. So you have to get yourself past the filter. And there's a few ways to get past the filter. You can go to Y Combinator, Launch, Techstars. So there's a few other accelerators. That's a way to get in, and then you're venture qualified. But you have to venture qualify yourself. And so it's really up to you to do something to get yourself noticed in terms of what you can do, right? You have to show what you can do, show something interesting that actually gets their attention. And now you've got their attention. And then you can get any meeting with any VC you want because you're venture qualified. You can get a warm intro from whoever's starting to back you, and then you can network yourself that way. And it's kind of hard to hear, but like, you do have to network yourself in, because cold deck emails, those are just not going to cut it, right? Like, there was a pretty famous VC that was being interviewed. It was sort of like a 60 minutes type interview, and I remember this. The host was asking, do you respond? Do you value cold decks that are sent to you, cold emails? And the VC said, oh yeah, they're very important. They're a measure of how popular our firm is. So what is that? What is he saying there? He's basically saying, yeah, we don't necessarily pay much attention to them as such, but we actually measure the volume to see how popular we are, right? So what that means is worst case scenario is you're successful, they fund a competitor of yours, and now they have, maybe in their archive, they have a deck from 2 years ago giving them insights into how you were thinking 2 years ago. That's, worst case scenario, basically. Best case scenario is nothing happens, essentially. a fluke could happen. I'm not saying nobody's ever, funded a cold deck email, but it's relatively rare. And then there's another. I'll just add one more thing, which is there was another video I had seen. This was Mark Andreessen. This was several years ago, so the numbers have changed, right? Maybe you can double all the numbers I mentioned, but someone was asking Mark Andreessen, like, how do you decide who to invest in, and how does that work? And he was saying, well, there's 4,000 venture qualified startups a year, and keep in mind, 40,000 applications to YC, right? But there's 4,000 venture qualified startups a year. 2,000 of which we see through our internal deal flow, 200 of which will get funded, 15 of which will be successful, and 2 of them will make a portfolio. And remember, double those numbers because this is from a few years ago. And when I heard that, I understood what I was hearing, right? It's just English, right? You understand those words, but you really have to understand what he's saying. 4,000 venture qualified means, yeah, there's 4,000 companies that want 40,000 companies that might want funding, but only 4,000 of them are venture qualified, meaning we would never look at the other ones. Okay. So there you already have a 10% cutoff. Of the venture qualified, he's saying 2,000 of which we see through our internal deal flow. What is he saying? He is only looking at 2,000 of those that are referred from his angel stage partner, SV Angels. And SV Angels is on an application. There's no way to apply. You have to network yourself into SV Angels. So how hard is this already? You have to network yourself into SV Angels to be seen as one of 2,000 by this firm. And of those, he goes, 200 get funded. So of the 2,000, 200 of the 4,000 venture qualified deals, 200 get funded in the Valley. And again, double the numbers. That means by any top tier VC. And then of those, 15 will be successful. That means like relatively successful in their eyes. And you have to keep in mind, for venture, they don't care about, you double, you triple. They're not in for double, triple. They want make the portfolio deals, right? And of those 15 that are successful, 2 of them will make a portfolio. So maybe that's 4 today. Those are companies that are going to become super unicorns that are going to return the entire portfolio to make up for all the other companies that are going to be losses, zeros, right? So if you look, and it took me a while to actually realize what all this meant, but it's a huge funnel. It's so hard to get in, and you have to get yourself noticed.
Again, Edward, like to your point, and because here the ecosystem is still new. I mean, like if I compare the Middle East startup ecosystem compared to Silicon Valley or some other older spots, this is why it's important to learn from this experience, because like we know that usually they say between 10 to 15%, and the numbers you mentioned, you said double, but I think from percentage perspective that will still the same. So probably 10 to 15% of the startups will succeed in the eyes of the VC. I mean, yeah, they would become unicorns or they would be acquired. They would have a good exit. Now, to the point of, getting noticed again, because at the end of the day, when you pitch a startup to a VC, you are selling actually. And I relate this to sales because it's a sales process. And getting noticed is very important because there's a huge difference. And I've seen it with some of the startups here locally and the founder that I spoke with. Even here, there is a huge difference between someone who get a warm introduction versus someone who's trying to just pass through, unless they're doing something really special, like something which I don't know, no one else have done it, and they were consistent, persistent, and pursuing also these VCs. This doesn't happen because, to your point, they receive probably a lot of emails. But one thing that you mentioned, Edward, and I'm not sure if many people thought about it, which is about, like, let's say if I have a startup, I send that pitch deck, it stayed there, and then they will remember 2 years later, oh, like there was this guy who sent us, like he's doing something, let's say in, I don't know, in food tech. Let's let's see what he was trying to do. So I never thought about it. So they have a bank, and because just people knows this, VCs, they hate NDAs. They don't like this, so don't send NDAs. So yeah, but again, I'm always believer, Edward, and maybe you'll agree with me that here it's not the idea only, it's like the execution. So for you, you 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 had a flawless execution by having 100k recurring revenue in just 6 months. So now tell me how this was like easy for you. Is it hard? And at the same time, how this also, reflected in your discussions with the investors, whether before or after that happened?
Yeah. So it's an interesting thing, because before you have revenue, okay, well, there's different stages of a company, right? There's just the idea and the founders. We have revenue, and we have product, and we have product, and then we have product and revenue. And so really the proof and the requirements to be able to pitch at that stage are different for all the different stages and all the different scenarios. So if you just have an idea and a team, the only metric for a VC is, how good is this team? How well do they work together? Do I like the idea? And what they're all thinking in the back of their heads is, what they're doing TAM calculations, total addressable market. They're trying to figure out, okay, if this is a winner, is this going to be worth a few $1 million, or is this going to be $1 billion company? Okay. They need to be able to see, how is this going to be $1 billion company? And so for recurring revenue, you want 100 million recurring revenue annual to have $1 billion company, because usually you have 10x revenue as sort of a baseline for this. And so they need to be able to see that, and all they have to go on is your team. So if you're from Stanford, MIT, or something like that, okay, great. Or you're the ex head of growth at Facebook, or you're the ex whatever at Google. Okay, you can probably get funded on team, which means you can get funded on idea stage, right? But you're likely not that, right? Those are very rare situations. So you probably have to have an MVP. And by the way, you can get funded in terms of an accelerator at that stage if you have an interesting team, right? You don't have to be from the top universities or whatever. You could apply to Y Combinator. You could apply to launch remotely just at that stage. And that's kind of what Founder University is for. It lets you get in much earlier when you just have the idea stage. But to get to like Y Combinator or launch or Techstars, you really do have to have an MVP that you can show. And if you're talking to investors, okay, maybe they'll fund you on MVP, but it would really have to be an unbelievably impressive MVP. It would have to be, game-changing technology that you can show as an MVP without having revenue. Okay, for them to take that bet. So they'd have to feel very comfortable about what you're building, be very impressed to fund it at that stage. And then you get to the, okay, we have to have revenue stage. If you start getting revenue, now you're no longer judged on those proxies for future performance. You are being judged on the revenue and the growth in the revenue specifically, right? Growth is what matters. And their confidence in your ability to keep up the growth. And that's called your go-to-market. And so in terms of execution, we had, again, like you're saying, near perfect execution, I would say. Our ARR was like, the graph is like, perfect graph, top right, very nice graph. And that graph was very effective in terms of dynamics with investors, because every time I would give them their monthly update, and also prospective investors, I would put them on our investor update, monthly email. And so every time they would get those updates, they would see our progress. And so I would cover traction, I would cover product, I would cover revenue, I would cover team, and all those different aspects of the business, just bullet points for every section, and a graph showing our ARR growth. And because we were able to get our first customers in September, we were able to hit 100K. I believe it was like mid-February. We ended last month. We ended at I think it was 162K, something like that. And this month we'll be in the 200 something at the end of the month. We're pretty close to the end of the month. So the growth curve is really great. So in terms of round dynamics, yeah, that is absolutely helpful if you have really amazing growth. So the danger kind of becomes, okay, you've done this and now you don't have great growth, right? Let's say you don't have great growth. It's going to be hard to get the investors to invest in it because they just don't have that proof point. But here's maybe another point that's important. If you don't have great growth, why would you want to get the venture funding? So this is it's hard to kind of accept this as a founder because I'm just thinking of myself and it's like maybe I would have said, oh, but if we had the investment, then we would be able to get the growth. But you're thinking of it the wrong way. Really, and you and the investor should be in line on this. If there's explosive growth, then pour money into it because you're going to fuel even more expensive growth. And that's what the investor wants to do. That's what you should want to do because a startup is like, if it's a successful startup, it's like a minimum 10-year investment of your life. So do you want to be spending 10 years on an idea that doesn't really have traction and you keep stubbornly trying to make it work and it's just not going to work? No, not really. What you want to do is be in a situation where you can actually put a really good effort at getting something going. And once you actually get a thing going that is actually having a really nice growth curve, then the investors will love you. You're going to be super happy because you're investing your time in something that's growing really fast, and you're going to be able to close those deals for your first round. So make it work first. Get people's attention. Be really good at doing something impressive. First of all, useful, getting customers, and work your way that way, and then you'll get into these programs. You'll get the investors. Don't think, oh, I'm going to raise a ton of money and then no, you're not going to raise a ton of money. You're not going to. It's not going to happen, right? Unless you're venture qualified some way. But that's the exception.
Absolutely. Edward, like this is another masterclass in when they need to go to, to raise funds from VCs. We discussed a lot on the podcast here as well with some of the founders. So for some of them, to your point, so they had the growth, they were happy with that growth, and they didn't feel the need for going to a VC at that stage because they were bootstrapping actually the company. Some of them, they had to go to angel investors, right? So the ones that went to VCs, as you mentioned, it's where they were VC ready. So there are some metrics that they can show. They have good traction, and then they could take it up from there. So absolutely, it's another masterclass, I would say. Now, Edward, like final words from you, also maybe some advice to fellow entrepreneurs and where people can find more about you and PodcastAI.
Yeah. So most recent episode of This Week in Startups, which is a popular podcast, is an interview with me. You can find me on Twitter or X at Edward Brawer. PodcastAI is podcastai.com, of course. Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure, Mehmet, being on the show and going through these stories with you.
It was my absolute pleasure also as well, Edward. People by now, they know I'm passionate about anything related to startups. I'm passionate about hearing successful and even sometimes unsuccessful founder stories. We had some of them because I don't believe in failure. I believe in learning, continuous learning. So this is why I know that you had your first startup and this one, you're just, absolutely rocking it, I would say. So congratulations, Edward. And I believe, what you're doing, especially because I'm a podcaster now. I used to say I'm doing it as a hobby, but now I can say I'm a podcaster. So absolutely something which resonates. I mean, the market needs it, and it has a lot of potential. You mentioned YouTube also as well. It was very interesting to hear from you also about, building LLMs, large language models, just for podcasters, which is something also new. It was also good to hear the story of your fundraising, especially how you did the homework, searched about the investors, and then attracted their attention as well. And at the end also, the points that you just ended with are really, really very helpful for the audience. Thank you very much, Edward, for sharing the knowledge here today. And this is how I usually add my episodes. This is for the audience. If you just discovered this podcast by luck, thank you for passing by. I hope you liked it. If you did so, please subscribe and share it with your friends and colleagues. We are available on all podcasting platforms, and we are available on YouTube also as well. And if you are one of the loyal followers who keep coming, thank you very much for your loyalty, for your comments, for your questions you ask me sometime. I'm always looking forward to answer you also. And if you are interested to be on the show, don't hesitate, reach out, and I would find a way to make it happen. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll meet very soon. Bye-bye.
Hit that subscribe button, share the show with your tech-savvy friends and fellow entrepreneurs, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. Your support means the world to us.